Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The photographs were arranged in a perfect circle on the stone outcropping at mile marker 3.7 of the Grinnell Glacier Trail. 23 Polaroids, each showing the same view of McDonald Creek from the same angle, same time of day. Morning light filtering through lodgepole pines, but taken over what appeared to be decades. Lisa Hoffman counted the dates scrawled on the white borders: 1987, 1991, 1995, 1999, 2003, 2007, and one dated yesterday that shouldn't exist because no one had been reported on this section of trail in the past week. The photographs were bone dry despite last night's rain that had turned the entire Glacier National Park backcountry into a mud field. When she picked up the most recent Polaroid, the chemical smell of developing fluid was still sharp in the September air, and the image showed something her mind initially refused to process: a figure standing in the creek, impossibly tall, with antlers that weren't antlers branching from a skull that wasn't quite a skull. Lisa's Motorola XPR 7550 radio remained silent on her hip. She'd checked it twice since finding the photographs 15 minutes ago. Confirmed the battery was full, squelch properly adjusted. The morning dispatcher shift at park headquarters in West Glacier should have checked in by now, standard protocol at 800 hours. But the only sound was wind moving through the pines with a rhythm that felt wrong, too deliberate, like breathing. She photographed the circle with her park-issue Canon EOS, documenting the scene from multiple angles, then collected each Polaroid with gloved hands and sealed them in evidence bags. The stone beneath where they'd been arranged showed no moisture, no debris, just smooth granite that looked recently cleaned, though the nearest water source was McDonald Creek, 40 feet downslope through dense underbrush. Lisa Hoffman had been a ranger at Glacier for 6 years. Before that, 5 years at Yellowstone, where her partner Jake Morrison had died during a rescue operation in the thoroughfare region. Ice shelf collapse. One moment he was rappelling down to reach a stranded hiker. The next moment 200 pounds of spring ice was crushing his chest cavity, while Lisa watched from the ridge above, helpless and screaming into a radio that picked up nothing but static. The investigation cleared her of wrongdoing, but she still saw the exact angle of his broken neck every time she closed her eyes. She'd transferred to Glacier, hoping the geography would be different enough to stop the nightmares. It hadn't worked. The missing person report had come in 3 days ago. Connor Burke, 29, day hiker from Seattle, solo expedition along the Grinnell Glacier Trail. His rental car was still parked at the trailhead, keys locked inside, wallet on the dashboard with credit cards and cash untouched. His emergency contact, an ex-girlfriend named Patricia, who kept calling the ranger station asking if they'd found anything weird, said Connor had been obsessed with local folklore, specifically stories about something called the Wetico, an Algonquian word Lisa had to look up online. Wendigo in English, spirit of starvation and cannibalism. The kind of legend she normally dismissed as campfire nonsense designed to scare tourists. But Connor Burke's research notes, recovered from his hotel room in West Glacier by the county sheriff, told a different story. Hand-drawn maps marking disappearances in the park over the past 40 years. Newspaper clippings about hikers found with signs of cannibalism, officially attributed to bear attacks or desperate survival situations. Interviews with Blackfeet elders transcribed in meticulous handwriting, warning about the Wetico wind, the Wendigo wind, that comes down from Canada every 7 years when the hunger grows too strong. According to Connor's research, 2008 was a Wendigo year. The last disappearances had been in 2001, 1994, 1987. The same years marked on the Polaroids. Lisa sealed the final photograph and stood, knees aching from crouching. She was 34 years old and felt twice that, the accumulated weight of loss and isolation pressing into her spine like stones in a cairn. Her Garmin GPS Map 64 showed her position as 48.7503 again, 113.7149 W, elevation 4,847 feet. The device had been acting strange since she'd passed mile marker 3. Coordinates jumping erratically, sometimes showing her location as 20 miles south, sometimes as if she was standing in the middle of Lake McDonald. She keyed her radio. "Base, this is Hoffman. Over." Static, thick and wet sounding. "Base, this is Ranger Hoffman on Grinnell Trail requesting comm check. Over." The static resolved into something that might have been words in a language she didn't recognize, guttural and rhythmic, before cutting out entirely. She checked the radio display. Full signal strength. No reason for the communication failure. The sun had moved wrong. Lisa looked up at the sky and felt her stomach drop. When she'd found the photographs, the sun had been southeast, maybe 30 degrees above the horizon. Now it hung almost directly overhead. Harsh noon light that didn't match her watch reading of 8:43 a.m. The shadows beneath the pines had shrunk to small dark pools. Time distortion. Impossible, but her eyes insisted otherwise. She needed to get back to the trailhead, report the photographs and communication issues, coordinate a proper search team for Connor Burke. The trail back should take 90 minutes at standard pace. She shouldered her pack, 40 pounds of emergency gear, first aid, rope, flares, and started hiking down trail, following the orange plastic markers hammered to trees at regulation intervals. After 20 minutes, she passed the same boulder formation 3 times. Lisa stopped and pulled out her compass. The needle spun in lazy circles, refusing to settle. She tried the Garmin again. It showed her moving in a spiral pattern, coordinates shifting with each reading. The trail markers were exactly where they should be, but somehow they were leading her in a loop, bringing her back to the same section of trail over and over. The temperature had dropped. Not gradually, all at once, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Her breath clouded in front of her face. Ice crystals formed on the pine needles above, spreading in geometric patterns that looked too precise to be natural. Lisa's fingers went numb inside her gloves. September in Montana could be cold, but this was January cold. January in the Arctic cold. The kind of deep freeze that shouldn't be possible. She heard footsteps behind her on the trail. Heavy footsteps, weight crunching through pine needles and snapping dead branches. The rhythm was wrong. Too slow, too measured. Each step followed by a pause just long enough to make her wonder if the next one would come. Lisa turned, one hand moving to the bear spray holstered at her chest, the other reaching for her radio. The trail was empty, but the footsteps continued, coming closer, accompanied now by a smell that made her gag. Rotting meat mixed with pine sap and something chemical, formaldehyde maybe, the stench of preserved death. Her rational mind said black bear, maybe a grizzly, though the season was wrong for aggressive behavior. Her hindbrain, the part that still remembered being prey on the African savanna, said run. Lisa didn't run. Running meant showing fear, and showing fear to a predator was suicide. She made herself big, arms wide, and activated her bear spray in a test burst. The orange cloud dissipated into the freezing air. The footsteps stopped directly behind her. She could feel breath on the back of her neck. Not warm breath, cold breath, each exhalation dropping the temperature another degree. Lisa turned slowly, bear spray ready, and saw nothing but empty trail and empty forest. The pines were wrong, though. They'd been lodgepole pines, straight and uniform. Now they were twisted, branches growing in spirals, bark forming patterns that looked almost like faces, mouths open in silent screams. Her radio crackled. A voice came through, distorted but recognizable. Jake Morrison's voice, the partner who died 3 years ago in Yellowstone. "Lisa, you need to see what I found," Jake's voice said, casual and relaxed, like he was reporting a routine trail issue. "Down by the creek? The tracks don't make any sense." Lisa's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the radio. "You're dead," she whispered. "I know," Jake's voice said. And now there was something underneath it, something grinding and hungry. "We're all dead down here, Lisa. All 23 of us, come see." The radio went silent. Lisa stood frozen, every nerve screaming contradictory messages. Hallucination from hypothermia. Had to be. The temperature was still dropping. She could see ice forming on her jacket sleeves, creeping across the Gore-Tex in fractal patterns. Her core temperature was falling. She needed to start moving, generate heat, get back to the trailhead even if the trail was impossible. She ran. The forest blurred past, pines blending into one continuous wall of twisted wood. The trail should have been clear, well-maintained, marked every 50 yards, but now it was overgrown with underbrush that grabbed at her boots, roots that writhed like tentacles, branches that reached down to scratch her face. Lisa's breath came in ragged gasps, her lungs burning despite the freezing air. The smell of rot was everywhere, thick enough to taste, decomposition and starvation and something else, something that made her think of empty bellies and hollow eyes, and the kind of hunger that consumed everything, even sanity. She burst into a clearing and stopped so suddenly she fell, hands catching on frozen ground that tore her gloves. The clearing was circular, 50 feet across, ringed by pines that had grown together at their tops to form a natural dome. In the center was a cairn, not the small trail markers built by hikers, but a massive structure 10 feet high, constructed from hundreds of stones precisely stacked. Arranged around the cairn were packs, hiking packs, ranging from modern internal frame models with bright colors to ancient external frame canvas designs from the 1970s. 23 packs, Lisa counted, each one sitting upright as if recently set down. Name tags dangled from most. Patricia Morrison, 1987. David Chen, 1991. Rebecca Stillwater, 1995. Connor Burke's pack was there too. Bright blue North Face model she recognized from the description in the missing person report. She crawled forward on numb hands and knees and opened it with shaking fingers. His wallet was inside, along with a tent, sleeping bag, water filter, MREs. Everything he would have needed for a week in the backcountry. And a journal, leather-bound, the pages covered in handwriting that devolved from neat sentences into frantic scrawls. Lisa read by the harsh noonlight that still didn't match her watch, which insisted it was only 9:30 a.m. Day 1. Found the photographs. Same pattern as the historical disappearances. Something is here, something old. The Blackfeet stories are real. Day 2. Temperature dropping. Can't find the trail. Radio won't work. GPS shows me in Canada, but I haven't crossed the border. Heard footsteps all night, saw something in the trees. Tall, wrong shape, antlers that branch like hands reaching. Day 3. So hungry. Haven't eaten since yesterday morning, but I can't remember yesterday morning. The hunger is in my head, in my bones, spreading like infection. It wants me to be hungry. It feeds on the hunger. I understand now. The Wendigo doesn't kill. It transforms. It makes you into what it is, starvation incarnate, consumption without end. I can feel it starting. My thoughts are fragmenting. I want to eat, but there's nothing here except I'm so hungry, so hungry. Hungry, 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 hungry. The handwriting dissolved into the word, hungry, repeated thousands of times, covering the remaining pages in increasingly erratic letters. Lisa dropped the journal and stood, backing away from the cairn. The temperature was still falling. Her exposed skin had gone from numb to burning, frostbite setting in, tissue crystallizing. She needed heat, needed shelter, needed to get out of this clearing and back to civilization. But the forest had closed around her. The gaps between trees had narrowed, trunks growing together like the walls of a cage. Movement in her peripheral vision. Lisa spun, bear spray raised, and saw him. Connor Burke, or what remained of Connor Burke. He stood at the edge of the clearing, naked despite the freezing temperature, skin pulled tight over bones that jutted at wrong angles. His face was skeletal, eye sockets hollow and dark, jaw elongated into something that looked more canine than human. Antlers grew from his skull, white bone branching up through torn scalp, each point dripping something that steamed in the cold. He was impossibly tall, 7 feet, maybe 8, stretched like taffy, limbs too long and jointed in too many places. When he opened his mouth, his jaw unhinged like a snake's, revealing rows of teeth that had never been human. The sound that came out was Jake Morrison's voice again, but layered with 23 other voices, all the people who disappeared over the decades, all speaking in unison. "We're so hungry, Lisa. So hungry it hurts. It never stops hurting. It burns like cold fire in your stomach, eating you from the inside, and the only way to make it stop is to eat, eat, eat. But nothing satisfies. Nothing fills the emptiness. We ate ourselves first. Fingers, toes, strips of meat from our thighs. Then we ate each other. Then we ate the forest, the bark, the roots, the frozen earth. And still we're hungry." Lisa ran again, crashing through underbrush that materialized in front of her, branches whipping her face, roots trying to trip her. Behind her, footsteps, not one set but many, all moving in that same too-slow rhythm that was somehow faster than she could run. The voices followed, chanting in unison. Words in Algonquian languages mixed with English, mixed with sounds that weren't language at all, just expressions of endless hunger. She burst out of the forest onto the shore of McDonald Creek and nearly fell into the water. The creek was frozen solid, ice thick enough to walk on, impossibly thick for September. Lisa looked upstream and saw them, all 23, standing in a line along the frozen creek. Not Connor Burke anymore, not any of the names in the journals. They'd all transformed into the same thing: skeletal giants with antlers, 2 long limbs, mouths full of teeth designed for one purpose. They moved toward her in unison, a wall of starvation and consumption, and Lisa understood with perfect clarity what Patricia, the ex-girlfriend, had meant by anything weird. This was ancestral weird, the weird that had made humans afraid of the dark and the cold and the winter when food ran out, and the choice became starve or eat the person next to you. This was the Wendigo, the Witiko Win, the manifestation of humanity's greatest taboo made flesh and hunger. Lisa's hand found the flare gun in her pack. Standard SAR equipment, 4 flares, effective range 300 yards. She fired straight up, the red phosphorus bloom bright against the gray sky. Then she fired again and again, using 3 flares in rapid succession, creating a signal that should be visible for miles. The Wendigos didn't stop. She fired the last flare directly at Connor Burke's transformed face. The phosphorus struck his antlers and ignited white-hot flames spreading across the bone. He screamed. All of them screamed, a sound that dropped Lisa to her knees, hands over ears, her own voice joining in involuntary, sympathetic agony. The smell of burning bone and rotting meat intensified, became unbearable. But they didn't burn. The flames consumed nothing, producing heat but no destruction, as if the Wendigos existed slightly outside normal physics, immune to fire the way they were immune to cold. Lisa scrambled backward on the ice, away from the advancing wall of hunger, and her hand touched something. A knife, partially frozen into the creek. She pried it loose. The blade was old, antler handle carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Blackfeet symbols, maybe, or older, the kind of tool someone would carry who knew what lived in these woods. The Wendigos stopped at the edge of the ice. 23 skeletal forms, steam rising from their mouths, antlers forming a forest of bone above hollow eye sockets. They didn't step onto the ice. Couldn't step onto it, Lisa realized. Water was a barrier in the folklore, running water specifically. The creek was frozen but still counted as water, still held some power that even transformed monsters respected. Connor Burke's voice came from all their mouths. "You can't stay there forever. You're already infected. We can smell it on you. The hunger is in your blood now, in your thoughts. It grows with exposure. Every minute you spend here, every breath of the Witiko wind you take, it gets stronger. Eventually you'll walk to us. Eventually you'll transform. Eventually you'll be so hungry that nothing matters except feeding." Lisa's stomach cramped. She realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast yesterday, had forgotten to eat in the stress of searching for Connor Burke. The hunger was normal, just her body requesting fuel. But it didn't feel normal. It felt consuming, overwhelming, a physical need that made her hands shake and her vision narrow, and her thoughts circle around a single word: hungry. She forced herself to think through the fog, the photographs, the pattern, every 7 years. The Wendigos couldn't leave the forest. They needed victims to come to them. The photographs were bait, arranged to be found, creating a mystery that would draw curious people into the woods at the right time. Connor Burke had come because he was researching the pattern. The others had come for their own reasons. All 23 over 4 decades, all in years divisible by 7. Why 7 years? Lisa asked, surprised she could still speak. The Wendigos tilted their heads in unison, antlers scraping against each other with a sound like wind chimes made of bone. The hunger sleeps, they said. It cycles. 7 years to build, 7 years to feed, 7 years to sleep again. The old people knew this. They had ceremonies, protections. They knew how to close the door we opened. But the old people are gone now. Their knowledge is gone, and we're so hungry. Lisa's mind raced. Connor Burke's research had mentioned Blackfeet elders, interviews, ceremonies. She fumbled for her pack, pulled out the evidence bags containing the Polaroids. The images showed the same view of the creek, but there were differences she hadn't noticed before. Small details in each photograph. In the 1987 image, a line of stones across the creek. In 1991, a circle of birch bark. In 1995, tobacco ties hanging from branches. Protections, wards, each one different, each one presumably unsuccessful since people still disappeared. But the photograph from yesterday, the impossible one that showed Connor Burke's transformation in progress, showed something else. A massive symbol drawn in stones on the far bank, complex and multi-layered, combining elements from all the previous protections. Connor had been trying to complete a ritual. His journal had said he understood, that the Wendigo fed on hunger, that it transformed victims. He'd been trying to close the door. Lisa looked at the antler-handled knife in her hand, then at the stones of the frozen creek bed, visible through the clear ice. Then at the Wendigos watching her with empty eyes that reflected nothing, consumed everything. "You need me to be hungry," she said slowly. "You need me to give in, to walk off this ice and let you transform me. That's how you perpetuate. That's how you feed." "Yes," they said, and their voices were almost gentle. "The hunger is beautiful, Lisa. It's pure. It's honest. It strips away all the lies we tell ourselves about civilization and morality. In the end, we're all just hunger, just need, just survival at any cost. You know this. You watched Jake Morrison die and you were glad. Glad it wasn't you. Glad you survived. That's the truth you won't admit. That's the hunger that's already inside you." Lisa's hands shook. They weren't wrong. She had been glad, in that first shocked moment before the grief crashed down. Glad she was alive and he was dead. The guilt of that admission had eaten her for 3 years, had driven her away from Yellowstone, had poisoned every moment of peace she tried to claim. But she was still here, still fighting, still refusing to surrender. She began arranging stones on the ice, using the knife to chip through the frozen surface and pull up creek rocks. The symbol from the photograph was complex, 3 circles intersecting, with lines radiating out in specific patterns. She worked from memory, hands so numb she could barely feel the stones constructing the ward one piece at a time. The Wendigos watched. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched with those hollow eyes, radiating cold and hunger and the promise of transformation. Lisa's thoughts fragmented as she worked. Images of food flashed through her mind, steaks, rare and dripping. Her mother's lasagna, fresh bread with butter, things she hadn't thought about in years suddenly vivid enough to taste. The hunger grew stronger, spreading like poison. Her stomach cramped so hard she doubled over, gasping. "You can't fight it," the Wendigos said. "No one fights it." Connor Burke tried. He drew the symbol. But the hunger won before he could finish the ceremony. It always wins. Lisa looked at the symbol taking shape beneath her hands. It was nearly complete. 3 intersecting circles of stone, radiating lines marking directions. But there was something missing. Something Connor Burke's photograph hadn't shown, or she'd failed to see. She pulled out her phone. No signal, but the camera still worked. Pulled up the photograph she'd taken of the Polaroids. zoomed in on the symbol. There, in the center of the 3 circles, barely visible in the image, a darker stone. Specific stone. She enhanced the image as much as the phone allowed. The stone was dark red. Bloodstone, maybe. Or something stained with blood. Lisa looked at the antler-handled knife. The blade had a dark patina along the edge, old stains that hadn't washed away despite decades of exposure. This was a ritual knife. A knife used for offerings. Blood, she said. The ceremony requires blood. The Wendigos' mouths opened in unison, that terrible unhinging jaw motion. Yes, they hissed. But whose blood, Lisa? Yours? You're already infected. Your blood is poison, tainted with hunger. Ours? We have no blood. We're starvation incarnate, consumption without substance. The ceremony requires pure blood. Willing blood. The blood of someone who chooses to give it rather than take. Lisa's mind raced through Connor Burke's research notes, the fragments she'd read in his journal. The Blackfeet ceremonies. The protections, blood offerings to appease spirits, to close doorways, to restore balance. But always willing offerings. Always given freely, never taken. She understood now why Connor Burke had failed. He'd waited too long, let the hunger take hold before attempting the ceremony. By the time he'd drawn the symbol, he was already transforming, already consumed by the need to consume. His blood had been tainted. Lisa's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the knife. The hunger was overwhelming now, a physical force that made her teeth ache and her stomach burn and her thoughts circle around feeding, nothing but feeding. She could feel the transformation starting, a cold spreading through her bones, thoughts fracturing into obsessive repetition. Hunger, hungry. She thought of Jake Morrison. The way he'd looked at her the morning he died, told her he was glad she was his partner, glad someone competent was on the other end of the rope. He'd trusted her completely. And she'd failed him. Not through negligence or incompetence, but through the simple chaos of ice and gravity and bad luck. She thought of all the hikers she'd helped over 6 years at Glacier, the lost teenager she'd found hypothermic and revived, the couple trapped on a ledge overnight that she'd rappelled down to reach, the countless search and rescues that ended with someone alive who wouldn't have been without her. She thought of the hunger, the way it twisted everything into consumption and need, and the reduction of human complexity into a single impulse. And she thought, I am not hunger. I am choice. Lisa placed the bloodstone in the center of the symbol, completing the pattern. Then she pressed the knife blade against her left palm and cut deep, drawing a line across skin and muscle that should have hurt but didn't. Her hands were too numb from cold. Blood welled up, brilliant red against white skin, steaming in the freezing air. She let it drip onto the bloodstone, each drop sending ripples through the ice, as if the frozen creek suddenly remembered it was water, was alive, was flowing. The Wendigos screamed. The sound was deafening, inhuman, 23 voices expressing rage and frustration, and something that might have been fear. They rushed forward onto the ice, skeletal forms moving impossibly fast, antlers lowered like weapons, mouths open wide enough to consume her whole. Lisa didn't run. She pressed her bleeding palm against the bloodstone and spoke the only words that came to her, words she'd heard Blackfeet Rangers use in prayers at the start of fire season. Grandfather, I ask for protection. I offer what is mine to give. Close the door. Keep them hungry. The ice cracked, not beneath her feet, beneath the Wendigos. Massive fractures spreading in geometric patterns that matched the stone symbol she'd created. Lines of breaking ice that glowed with a light that shouldn't exist underground. The Wendigos fell, 23 skeletal forms plunging through ice into water that was somehow liquid despite the freezing temperature, somehow running despite being frozen solid. They didn't sink. They dissolved. Bone and flesh and antler and hunger all dissolving into the creek like ink in water, spreading and thinning and finally vanishing. The last sound was a whisper in 23 voices. Thank you. The temperature rose instantly. Ice melted off the trees, running in streams that soaked the ground. The sun moved in the sky, lurching from noon back to morning in the span of seconds until it matched Lisa's watch, 10:15 a.m. Only 90 minutes since she'd found the photographs, though it felt like days. Lisa's radio crackled to life. "All units, this is base. Comm check, over." She keyed the transmit button with her good hand, her left still bleeding slowly. "Base, this is Hoffman. I have a medical emergency at my location and need immediate evacuation. Also requesting recovery team for multiple missing persons. Coordinates to follow. Over." "Copy that, Hoffman. Dispatch helicopter en route. What's your status?" "Over." Lisa looked at her bleeding palm, at the symbol in stones that was already falling apart as the ice continued melting, at the 23 packs arranged around the cairn. "I'm cold and hungry," she said. "But I'm alive." Over. The helicopter arrived 30 minutes later. By then, Lisa had tourniquet her hand and was methodically documenting the clearing with her camera. The packs, the cairn, the stone symbol, everything. The search and rescue team found no bodies, just personal effects and journals detailing transformations that medical science would never explain. The official report attributed the disappearances to exposure and disorientation, possibly some shared psychotic episode among people who'd researched the same local folklore. Lisa didn't argue. She knew the truth would sound insane. She spent a week in Kalispell Regional Medical Center recovering from frostbite and a severed tendon in her left hand. The doctors said she was lucky. Another hour of exposure and she'd have lost fingers. They couldn't explain the frostbite in September when temperatures had never dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Patricia called again while Lisa was still hospitalized, asking if they'd found Connor. Lisa said yes, they'd found evidence but no body. She didn't mention the journals or the Wendigo or the ceremony. She did say that Connor had been trying to protect people, that he'd died doing something brave. It seemed like the kindest version of the truth. Lisa returned to work 3 weeks later, restricted to desk duty while her hand healed. She spent most of her time in the park archives, reading old reports, cross-referencing disappearances. The pattern went back further than Connor Burke had documented, 1980, 1973, 1966, all the way to 1938 when park records began. Every 7 years, multiple disappearances along the same section of trail, all attributed to natural causes, all unsolved. Except now the pattern was broken. She checked the news daily, watching for any reports of missing hikers on Grinnell Glacier Trail. Nothing. The forest had gone quiet. 1 month after the incident, Lisa drove out to the Blackfeet Reservation east of the park. She found the elder Connor Burke had interviewed, an old man named James Running Crane who lived in a small house outside Browning. She showed him photographs of the stone symbol, asked if he recognized it. He studied the images for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Starvation door," he said in accented English. "My grandfather taught me about it," said his grandfather taught him. The old ones made offerings to keep it closed. Tobacco, sweet grass, sometimes blood. But people forgot. The ceremony stopped. The door opened. "Is it closed now?" Lisa asked. "For 7 years," James said. "Then you'll need to make the offering again. 7 years. Every 7 years until the hunger dies completely." Lisa left her phone number. "Call me in 2015, she said. "I'll be here." She drove back to her apartment in West Glacier as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold. Her left hand ached where the tendon had been repaired, a constant reminder of the choice she'd made. She wasn't hungry anymore. The oppressive need that had consumed her on the frozen creek was gone, replaced with normal appetite, normal desires. But sometimes, late at night when the temperature dropped and wind moved through the pines outside her window, she heard footsteps. Slow, measured footsteps that stopped just outside her door. And 23 voices whispering in unison, not threatening now, just present, acknowledging her, thanking her, waiting. Lisa kept the antler-handled knife in her nightstand drawer, blade cleaned and oiled. In her closet, sealed in a plastic bin, she'd saved one of the Polaroids, the image showing Connor Burke's transformation. the moment between human and Wendigo. She never looked at it, but knowing it was there felt important, a talisman against forgetting. Because the thing about hunger was that it never truly disappeared. It just slept, cycling through seasons, waiting for the door to open again. And in 7 years, Lisa would be there to close it, to make the offering, to choose once more to be something other than consumption. She could live with that. She had to live with that. The hunger was patient. It could wait 7 years. So could she. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The photographs were still damp when Amanda Castellano found them pinned to the ranger station door. 6 Polaroids, their edges curling in the October mist that rolled through the Hoh rainforest like something breathing. Each image showed Megan Price's campsite at mile marker 9. Her blue tent, her backpack hanging from the bear line, her hiking boots arranged neatly by the entrance. Standard documentation shots. Except Megan had been missing for 4 days, and according to the timestamp scrawled in the white borders, these photos had been taken this morning. Amanda pulled one free, careful not to smudge the still tacky emulsion. The handwriting was definitely Megan's, that distinctive way she made her 7s with a slash through the middle. 6:47 a.m., October 19th, 2009, 3 hours ago. Amanda's hands steadied as her mind engaged the problem like a mathematical equation. Megan's Polaroid camera had been logged into evidence on October 16th, found inside her tent along with her wallet, keys, and cell phone. The camera had been empty. No film pack. She examined the remaining photos. Same campsite, different angles. The timestamps progressed in 20-minute intervals. 7:08 a.m., 7:31 a.m., 7:54 a.m. In the last photo, something stood at the forest edge behind the tent. A pale figure, too distant to make out clearly, but distinctly human-shaped. Amanda's pulse didn't quicken. It never did during analysis mode. Instead, she noted the figure's proportions. Too tall, too thin. The way it seemed to exist slightly out of focus, even though the tent in the foreground was sharp. She flipped the photo over. On the back, in Megan's handwriting, "She's been watching me. She knows what I did." Amanda had been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 8 years, and she'd built her reputation on rational explanations. Lost hikers weren't abducted by Sasquatch. They got disoriented and walked in circles until exposure or dehydration took them. Strange lights weren't UFOs. They were bioluminescent fungi or headlamps refracted through fog. When other rangers whispered about the wrong parts of the forest, Amanda cataloged their superstitions as psychological responses to isolation and pattern-seeking brains finding meaning in randomness. But this was data that didn't fit. She pulled her Motorola radio from her belt and keyed the mic. "Station 1 to base, I need someone to check the evidence locker, specifically Megan Price's Polaroid camera. Confirm it's still there." "Static then." "Copy, Station 1. Stand by." Amanda studied the station door while she waited. The photos had been pinned with Megan's own pushpins, the red ones she always used on the bulletin board. Amanda had watched the evidence team bag those pins 4 days ago. She'd initialed the evidence bags herself. The radio crackled. "Station 1, this is base. Camera is still in the locker. Bag seal is intact. What's going on?" "I'll explain when I get back. Send someone to relieve me at the station. I'm heading to mile marker 9. "Amanda, you know the search parameters. We've been over that site 6 times. There's nothing." "Send someone. I'll be back before dark." She didn't wait for acknowledgement before switching off the radio. The logical part of her brain was already mapping the route, calculating travel time, listing the equipment she'd need. But underneath that familiar analytical process, something new stirred. A small voice that sounded disturbingly like intuition, whispering that the forest had just changed the rules of the game. Amanda had met Megan Price 3 months ago when the younger woman transferred from Mount Rainier, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in ecology, bright-eyed and enthusiastic about studying old-growth temperate rainforests. She'd reminded Amanda of herself at 25, before 8 years of budget cuts and bureaucratic paperwork had sanded down her idealism into pragmatic efficiency. They'd worked together on a trail maintenance project in late August. Megan had talked constantly, filling the silence with facts about Sitka spruce nitrogen fixation rates and the symbiotic relationships between Douglas fir and mycorrhizal fungi. Amanda had found it annoying at first, then oddly comforting. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be passionate about the science instead of just the daily grind. On October 15th, Megan had gone out for a routine solo patrol of the Hoh River Trail. She'd checked in at 14 mile hours from mile marker 6. At 16:30, she should have checked in again from mile marker 12. She hadn't. By 19 hours, when she failed to return to base, they'd initiated search protocols. They'd found her campsite at mile marker 9 the next morning. Tent pitched, gear organized, no signs of struggle. Her radio was on the ground outside the tent, crushed. Not dropped or lost, crushed, like someone had taken a rock and deliberately smashed the electronics into fragments. Her cell phone was inside, dead battery, but her Garmin GPS was gone. That detail had bothered Amanda. Megan was meticulous about her equipment. She wouldn't have lost the GPS. The search had been thorough. Grid patterns, K9 units, thermal imaging from the helicopter when the weather cleared. Nothing. No tracks leading away from the campsite, no blood, no disturbed vegetation. Megan Price had simply ceased to exist. Except now she was apparently taking photographs. Amanda reached mile marker 9 in 90 minutes, pushing harder than she should have through the familiar trail. The temperate rainforest pressed close on both sides, ancient Sitka spruce and western hemlock forming a canopy so dense the undergrowth existed in perpetual twilight. Nurse logs thick with moss and ferns created natural barriers. The air tasted green and wet, heavy with the smell of decay and growth happening simultaneously. Megan's campsite looked exactly as it had in the photographs. Blue tent, bear bag hanging from the line, boots by the entrance. The crime scene tape was still up, though it sagged now, rain-soaked and faded. Amanda ducked under it and approached slowly, her brain automatically cataloging details. The tent was open. It had been zipped shut when they'd processed the scene 4 days ago. She was certain. She'd watched them seal it herself. Amanda pulled her flashlight from her belt and crouched at the entrance. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been during evidence collection, down to the sleeping bag bunched on the left side and the paperback mystery novel face down on the camp pad. But there was something new. In the center of the floor, arranged in a careful circle, were 23 Polaroid photographs. She didn't touch them immediately. Instead, she documented their position with her own digital camera, taking shots from multiple angles. Then, glove-clad, she picked up the first photo. It showed the interior of the tent. This tent, taken from approximately where Amanda was crouching now. The timestamp read October 19, 2009, 9:23 a.m., 45 minutes ago. The second photo showed the same view, same timestamp. But in this one, something was wrong with the sleeping bag. It had shifted position. No, not shifted. There was a shape under it. Human-sized. The lump of a body beneath the fabric. Amanda's analytical mind tried to provide explanations. Someone else was here. Someone was playing a prank, or trying to interfere with the investigation, or... She picked up the third photo. The sleeping bag had been pulled back. Underneath was Megan Price's body. No, not her body. Her face. Just her face, pressed against the tent floor as if she were drowning in the fabric itself. Mouth open in a silent scream. Eyes wide and wrong. Too white. No irises. No pupils. Just white. Amanda's hand trembled. She forced it still through sheer will and reached for the fourth photograph. This one showed her, Amanda Castellano, crouching exactly where she was now, holding the third photograph, staring at it with an expression of controlled horror. The timestamp read 9:52 a.m., 2 minutes from now. She dropped the photo. Her rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that someone was watching her right now, that she needed to get out. but her training overrode panic. She spun, flashlight sweeping the tent's interior, then outside through the mesh screen window. Nothing, just the green silence of the forest and the constant drip of condensation from the canopy. She checked her watch. 9:51 a.m. Against every instinct, she picked up the fourth photo again. Yes, that was her. Same jacket, same gloves, same angle. And in the background, visible through the tent's mesh window, that pale figure stood among the trees. Amanda turned slowly, following the angle from the photograph. The figure should be approximately 30 feet away, slightly northeast of the tent. There was nothing there, just a massive Sitka spruce wrapped in moss, its bark forming patterns that could almost look like... She blinked. When her eyes refocused, the figure was visible, not clearly, not in sharp focus, but present. A woman in white, impossibly tall and thin, her hair hanging forward to obscure her face. She stood absolutely motionless, and somehow Amanda knew with certainty that defied logic, that the figure had been there the entire time. Amanda simply hadn't been able to see her until she looked in exactly the right way. "Megan?" Amanda's voice sounded too loud in the muffled quiet. "Megan Price?" The figure's head tilted. Slowly, mechanically, wrong angles. Her hair shifted, and for a moment Amanda glimpsed what lay beneath. A face. White as milk, features too sharp, eyes that were holes opening onto nothing. Amanda's radio crackled to life. "Duh. Amanda, do you copy? The voice distorted, stretched, until it sounded like someone screaming underwater. Then silence. When she looked back at the trees, the figure was 10 feet closer. Amanda stumbled backward, training finally breaking down into pure survival instinct. She turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, her breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the absolute certainty that something was behind her. The forest had changed. The trail markers were wrong. The trees seemed to lean in, branches reaching lower. The mist thickened until she could barely see 5 feet ahead. Her compass spun uselessly, the needle rotating in slow circles that made her stomach lurch. She ran for what felt like hours, but her watch insisted was only 12 minutes before she burst into a clearing she didn't recognize. A stream cut through the center, the water moving too fast, too dark. On the far bank, she saw another tent. Green this time, more weathered than Megan's. And standing beside it, facing away, was Megan Price. "Megan," Amanda's voice cracked. "Megan, it's Amanda Castellano, from Olympic. Do you remember me?" The figure didn't turn, didn't move at all. Amanda approached the stream, her boots sinking into the soft earth at its edge. Up close, the water was wrong. Too black, almost viscous. When she looked at her reflection, her face seemed to ripple and distort even though the water was moving too fast for a clear image. "Megan, you need to respond. You've been missing for 4 days. Everyone's looking for you." Slowly, the figure turned. It wore Megan's face like a mask. Too perfect, too symmetrical. As if someone had constructed it from memory of what Megan should look like rather than what she actually was. Her eyes were all wrong. Too wide, too white. Exactly like in the photograph. "She needs to know what I did." Megan's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the trees in overlapping waves. "She needs to understand why I deserve this." "Who needs to know?" "Megan, what happened to you?" "I killed her." Megan's mouth moved, but the sound came from behind Amanda, from the stream, from the ground itself. "In Japan, 5 years ago, the exchange program, there was a girl, Akiko. She loved me. I used her. I lied. She died because of me. Jumped from the dormitory roof. I came back to America and I just forgot. I let myself forget." Amanda's hands were shaking now, her analytical mind struggling to process what was happening. "Megan, even if that's true, even if something terrible happened, we can get you help. Medical attention, you're clearly in shock." "I'm dead." Megan smiled, and the expression was all wrong, too wide, her lips pulling back to reveal too many teeth. "I've been dead since October 15th. I just didn't know it yet. She found me. Akiko. She followed me here. All the way across the ocean she followed. Do you know what a Yurei is, Amanda? A vengeful ghost. They don't forget. They don't forgive. They just wait, and wait. And when they find you..." Megan's form flickered like bad reception. For a moment, Amanda saw through her to the tent behind. Then she solidified again, but wrong now, all pretense of humanity dropping away. Her neck stretched impossibly long. Her hair fell forward in a black curtain that moved independent of wind or gravity. Her white clothing shifted and merged with her skin until Amanda couldn't tell where cloth ended and flesh began. "She's teaching me." Megan's voice had changed too, lower now, layered with something else underneath. "She's showing me how it feels, to be forgotten, to have your death mean nothing, to be erased from someone's story like you never mattered at all." "I'm sorry." Amanda didn't know why she said it, didn't know if it would help, but the words came anyway. "I'm sorry for what happened to Akiko. But this isn't justice. This is exactly justice." The voice that came from Megan's distorted form was no longer hers at all. It was older, sharper, filled with an anger that had been aging for 5 years into something colder than hate. "She forgot. I will make sure she remembers. Forever." Megan raised her hand, and Amanda saw that her fingers were too long, the nails like broken glass. Behind her, other figures emerged from the mist. More women in white, their faces hidden by hair, their forms too tall and too thin to be human. They moved in that same mechanical way, joints bending at impossible angles. Amanda ran. Again. Because every rational explanation had shattered, and all that remained was the primal understanding that she was being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. The forest blurred around her, trees and mist and shadow blending into a nightmare landscape where direction had no meaning. She found herself back at Megan's campsite. No, not Megan's. A different tent, red this time, no crime scene tape, fresh boot prints in the mud. And standing at the entrance was the pale woman from the first photograph. Up close, Amanda could see her clearly now. Long black hair hanging like a veil, white clothing that might have been a robe or a burial shroud. Where her face should be, there was just a suggestion of features beneath the curtain of hair. And when she moved, the air around her grew cold enough that Amanda could see her breath. "You're Akiko." Amanda forced the words out through chattering teeth that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Akiko Tanaka. I'm not Megan. I didn't hurt you. Please." The figure tilted her head again in that horrible mechanical way. Then she reached up with fingers that ended in points like needles and slowly pulled her hair aside. Amanda saw the face beneath, and something broke inside her mind. Not the grotesque horror she'd been expecting, but something worse. Perfect beauty, marred by absolute grief. Akiko's face was lovely, delicate, frozen at whatever age she'd been when she died. But her eyes were holes that went down forever, dark tunnels leading to nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Looking into them was like looking at the photograph of her own death. "Not you." The voice was barely a whisper, but it filled Amanda's skull with pressure until she thought her head would split. "Not you, but you will witness. You will remember. You will tell the story." The forest around them changed. The mist peeled back and Amanda saw them. Dozens of figures in white, standing silent among the trees. All women, all with that same terrible beauty and that same impossible grief. Some looked recent, their features still clear. Others seemed older, their forms more transparent, as if they were fading slowly into the forest itself. "We are the forgotten ones." Akiko's voice had changed, multiplying, until it seemed like all the figures spoke in chorus, the ones who died in anger and pain, the ones whose deaths were convenient, whose suffering was buried, whose names were erased. "We remember. We will always remember. And we will make sure others remember too. The ground beneath Amanda's feet began to soften, turning liquid. She looked down and saw water rising from the earth itself, dark and cold. The stream. She was sinking into the stream that wasn't a stream but something else entirely. A river of grief, of rage, of every bitter tear shed by women whose pain had been dismissed and forgotten. She was drowning in it. The water closed over her head, and she saw them all beneath the surface. Hundreds of them now. Thousands. Stretching back through decades, centuries, millennia. All the forgotten dead, all the erased victims, all the convenient casualties. They reached for her with hands that were nothing but bone and mist, pulling her down into their collective memory. This is how I die, she thought with perfect clarity. This is how Megan died, drowned in remembering. But then, a change. The hands that pulled at her began to push instead. Akiko's face appeared in the water, her eyes no longer empty but filled with something that might have been recognition, might have been pity. "Not you," she said again. "Not yet. First you remember, then you tell. Then, maybe then, you understand." Amanda burst from the water gasping, crawling onto solid ground that felt real again, felt present. She was back at the actual stream near mile marker 9, the one that appeared on actual maps. Her clothing was soaked, her radio ruined, but she was alive. Behind her, standing at the water's edge, Akiko remained visible. Solid now, or as solid as a ghost could be. She pointed one long finger towards something in the mud near Amanda's hand. Megan's Garmin GPS, the missing piece of evidence. Amanda picked it up with shaking hands and turned it on. Somehow, impossibly, it still had battery. The screen flickered to life and showed a single waypoint saved in memory. Coordinates Amanda didn't recognize. She's there. Akiko's voice was fading now, becoming part of the forest sounds, the drip of water, the sigh of wind through trees. What's left of her? Bring her home. Tell her story. Tell my story. Remember us both. That is the price for your life. I will. Amanda's voice was hoarse, damaged from the drowning that hadn't quite happened. I promise. I'll remember. I'll make sure everyone remembers. The figure nodded once, and then she was gone. Not fading, not walking away, simply not there anymore, as if she'd never been. But the cold remained, and the certainty that Amanda had been seen by something that existed outside the rational world she'd spent 8 years defending. She looked at the GPS coordinates. They pointed to a location about 2 miles north off trail, in an area the search teams hadn't covered because the terrain was too difficult, and Megan had no reason to go there. Amanda made it back to the station by 16 hours, soaked and shaking and unable to explain what had happened in any terms that made sense. She reported the GPS coordinates. The team went out at first light the next day with full technical climbing gear. They found Megan Price in a narrow ravine that didn't appear on any maps, hidden beneath a fallen old-growth cedar. She'd broken both legs in the fall and died of exposure over several days. The ravine walls were covered in scratches, her fingernails, they later determined. She'd tried to climb out. For days she'd tried. Near the body they found her Polaroid camera with a fresh film pack, and on the memory card of her own digital camera. They found hundreds of photos taken during those final days. The earliest ones showed her injured, trying to splint her legs with branches. The middle ones showed her deteriorating, hallucinating, writing in her journal about someone watching from above. The final photos were just of darkness, taken blind as the battery died. But there were other images too, ones that shouldn't have been there. Photos of Akiko Tanaka, standing at the ravine's edge looking down. The timestamps matched the hours of Megan's death. In Megan's journal, they found a confession about the exchange program in Osaka, about Akiko, a Japanese student she'd led on and used for housing and money, about the girl's suicide and how Megan had left the country immediately after, telling herself it wasn't her fault, that Akiko had been unstable anyway, that she couldn't be blamed for someone else's choices, but she was there. The final entry read, "She's been here the whole time, watching, waiting, making sure I remember, making sure I finally understand what I did, what it means to be forgotten, what it means to die alone, your pain dismissed, your death convenient for everyone but you. She's teaching me. I deserve this lesson." The official report called it accidental death. Amanda didn't argue. How could she? How could she explain the photographs that showed impossible things? The soaked radio that somehow still worked when they tested it in the lab. The way her compass had spun in circles for 3 days afterward before suddenly working normally again. She couldn't. So she didn't. But she kept the photographs. The ones pinned to the station door, the ones from inside the tent, all of them. She kept Megan's journal entries about Akiko. And she researched, spent months learning about Yurei, about Onryo, about the specific cultural understanding of ghosts in Japan, about how they're not like Western ghosts, not just echoes or residual energy. They're willful entities, driven by purpose, patient as mountains. She learned about Akiko Tanaka, found old articles about her death in Osaka, a promising student, 21 years old, who jumped from her dormitory on October 15, 2004, exactly 5 years before Megan Price died. The articles were brief, dismissive. No note was found. The student had been depressed. Unconfirmed reports of a relationship gone wrong. Forgotten, convenient, dismissed. Amanda built a small shrine in her apartment, not officially sanctioned, not religiously motivated. She still didn't believe in the supernatural in any way that made sense to her rational mind. But she'd witnessed something that demanded acknowledgement. She placed Akiko's photo there, printed from a memorial page she found online. Next to it, a photo of Megan taken during that trail maintenance project in August, smiling and alive and unaware of what was coming. And every day she remembered, spoke their names, acknowledged their stories. Because Akiko had taught her something that 8 years of forestry work never had, that forgetting isn't neutral. It's a choice. It's a violence all its own. Sometimes on night shifts at the station, Amanda sees movement in her peripheral vision. A pale figure at the forest edge, too tall and too thin, watching with eyes that are either empty or infinitely deep, depending on how she looks. She doesn't run anymore. Instead, she nods acknowledgement. Respect, recognition. The forest has its own rules, its own justice, its own memory that's longer and deeper than maps or GPS coordinates can capture. Amanda spent 8 years thinking she understood it through science and rationality. Now she knows better. Some things can't be measured or explained. They can only be witnessed, remembered, and honored. Megan Price died on October 19, 2009 in Olympic National Park. Akiko Tanaka died on October 15, 2004 in Osaka, Japan. Their stories are connected by guilt and grief and the terrible patience of the dead. Amanda Castellano survived to tell those stories, to remember both women, to make sure their names, their pain, their deaths actually matter. That's the price she paid for her life. She pays it every day. And in the deep places of the Hoh rainforest, where the mist never quite lifts and the silence is too complete, something watches and waits. Not gone. Never gone. Just patient. Because Yurei don't fade. They don't forgive. They simply make sure no one ever forgets again. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Olympic National Park, Washington, October 2011. Daniel Marsh had always believed that nature operated on principles, cause and effect, action and reaction. 14 years as a ranger in Olympic National Park had only reinforced this certainty. Rain fell because atmospheric pressure dropped. Trees died because beetles burrowed. Hikers got lost because they ignored trail markers and overestimated their abilities. The forest didn't care about superstition. He adjusted the Garmin eTrex GPS unit clipped to his belt, watching the coordinates update as he moved deeper into the Hoh rainforest. The device showed his position with reassuring precision: 47.597 degree N, 123.93 degree W. Behind him, the Trailhead Visitor Center had disappeared into the cathedral of moss-draped Sitka spruce and western hemlock. Above, the canopy filtered October sunlight into a greenish twilight that never quite reached the forest floor. His Motorola radio crackled. "Ranger Marsh, this is dispatch. What's your 20? Daniel pressed the transmit button. "About 2 miles up Hoh River Trail. No sign of the missing hiker yet." "Copy that. Weather Service is calling for heavy rain by 1600 hours. You've got maybe 3 hours of decent visibility." "Understood." He released the button and continued walking, his Red Wing boots silent on the carpet of moss and fallen needles. Lauren Keating, 23 years old, graduate student from the University of Washington, studying old-growth forest ecology. She'd signed in at the ranger station 3 days ago, planning a solo overnight trip to study nurse logs and fungal networks. Her car was still in the parking lot, covered in a film of condensation and fallen hemlock needles. Her emergency contact, her faculty advisor, Dr. Patricia Chen, had called yesterday when Lauren missed 2 scheduled check-ins. Standard missing persons protocol. Probably camped somewhere off-trail, lost track of time, let her phone battery die. Daniel had seen it dozens of times. He stopped at the first junction, where Hoh River Trail split toward the lateral moraine. His eyes scanned the undergrowth automatically, looking for broken branches, disturbed vegetation, anything suggesting recent passage. The forest here was almost prehistoric. Massive nurse logs decomposing into soil, sword ferns erupting in dense clusters, everything perpetually wet and growing. Something white caught his eye. Daniel approached slowly, his pulse steady. A torn piece of paper caught in a salal bush about 20 feet off the trail. He pulled on latex gloves from his pack before touching it, standard procedure for evidence collection, and carefully extracted the paper. It was a page from a field journal, the kind with waterproof synthetic paper. Lauren's handwriting, he assumed. Precise, scientific, October 11th, 3:47 p.m. Coordinates, 47.86112, N, 123.9389, W. Observed, unusual mycorrhizal formation on western hemlock, approximately 240 years old. Core sample estimate. Fungal body appears to be the entry ended mid-sentence. The paper's edge wasn't torn, it was cut, cleanly, as if with scissors. Daniel turned it over. On the back, written in different ink and a shakier hand, "She's still here." The words had bled slightly, as if written in the rain, or as if the writer's hand had been trembling. Daniel took a photograph with his Nikon point-and-shoot camera, documenting the location and the note itself. Then he carefully placed it in an evidence bag from his pack. The coordinates from Lauren's journal were about a quarter-mile northeast, off-trail but not impossibly so. He checked his GPS again, marked a waypoint, and began pushing through the undergrowth. The forest changed as he moved away from the established trail. The sounds changed first. The subtle audio texture of the rainforest, usually a constant backdrop of dripping water and distant bird calls, seemed to compress. Not quieter exactly, just denser, more present. Daniel's analytical mind cataloged it automatically. Acoustic dampening from the thick canopy, moisture in the air affecting sound propagation. But his hands felt cold, despite his Gore-Tex gloves. He found the hemlock Lauren had described at exactly the coordinates she'd noted. It was massive, easily 8 feet in diameter, its bark deeply furrowed and covered in liverworts. At its base, the mycorrhizal network she'd documented spread in pale thread-like patterns across the dark soil. Except this formation was unusual. Daniel wasn't a mycologist, but even he could see that the pattern was too regular, almost geometric. The fungal threads formed a rough circle about 6 feet across, and within that circle, the ground was strangely clear. No moss, no small plants, just dark earth and those white fungal threads. Daniel photographed it from multiple angles, his scientific training overriding his growing unease. There would be an explanation. Fungal networks sometimes created fairy rings, circles where nutrients were depleted or concentrated, affecting plant growth. This was just an unusually pronounced example. He was focusing his camera when he saw the footprints. Bare footprints. Small, leading away from the circle, deeper into the forest. Daniel crouched examining them with his flashlight even though enough daylight still penetrated the canopy. The prints were precise, clear, as if someone had walked through here minutes ago. But the ground was soft with rain and decomposition. These should have been partially collapsed, filled with water. Instead, they looked fresh. More than that, they looked wrong. The toes were too long, the arch too pronounced, and they were evenly spaced, mechanically regular, as if whoever made them had been walking with perfect measured steps. Daniel's radio crackled with static. He grabbed it quickly, grateful for the connection to the rational world of dispatch protocols and weather reports. Marsh here. Nothing but static. He adjusted the frequency, checked the battery indicator. Full power, clear channel. But when he transmitted again, the static intensified, developing a strange rhythmic quality, almost like breathing. Then cutting through the static, a voice, not dispatch. A woman's voice, distant and hollow. Daniel. His finger froze on the transmit button. The voice continued, each word separated by long pauses. Daniel. She's still here. The radio went dead, completely silent. No static, no hiss, nothing. Daniel stared at the device, his analytical mind rejecting what had just happened while his hindbrain screamed at him to run. He'd been working in these woods for 14 years. Radio interference happened. Atmospheric conditions, electronic equipment, even solar activity could cause strange effects. And voices in static were a known phenomenon. Pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to find patterns in random noise. But it had said his name. Daniel stood slowly, scanning the forest around him. The light was dimming, though his watch showed only 2:17 p.m. The heavy rain was coming early, or the canopy was thicker here, or nothing. There was always an explanation. He followed the footprints. They led him deeper into a part of the forest he'd never patrolled, where the old growth trees were even more massive, their trunks disappearing into the perpetual mist. The prints continued in that same mechanical rhythm, never deviating, never showing the natural variations of human gait. After 50 yards, they stopped, not faded or grew indistinct. Stopped. The final print was as clear as the first, and beyond it, nothing. The forest floor showed no sign of disturbance. Daniel turned in a slow circle, his flashlight beam cutting through the deepening gloom. Behind him, the prints he'd followed still marched in their perfect line, but now they seemed to be arranged in a pattern he hadn't noticed before. When viewed from this angle, they didn't lead away from the mycorrhizal circle. They led toward something, toward him. His light caught something ahead, a shape among the trees. Daniel approached carefully, his boots finding purchase on the slick ground. The shape resolved into a camping tent, a bright red North Face two-person model, Lauren's tent presumably. It was properly set up, the rain fly secured, no signs of struggle or hasty departure. "Lauren?" he called out, his voice sounding flat in the dense air. "This is Ranger Daniel Marsh with Olympic National Park. I'm here to check on your welfare." No response. Daniel circled the tent once, documenting with photographs. The surrounding area was undisturbed. No scattered gear, no signs of an animal encounter. Everything was neat, orderly, exactly how an experienced backpacker would leave a campsite. He unzipped the tent's fly. The smell hit him first. Not decay, but something stranger. Wet earth and something floral. Jasmine, maybe, except wrong somehow. Too sweet and too cold at once. Lauren's gear was inside, neatly arranged. Sleeping bag rolled, backpack organized, field journals stacked with that same precise handwriting. But no Lauren. Daniel reached for the top journal, his gloved hands careful with the synthetic pages. He opened it to the last entry. October 12th, 11:34 p.m. "I can't leave. Every time I pack up and start walking back to the trail, I end up here again. I've tried 4 times. I mark the trees, I use my GPS, I follow my own footprints backward, but I always return to this exact spot. The coordinates don't change. It's not possible, but it keeps happening. Something is watching me. I see her at the edge of my flashlight beam, long black hair, white clothing. She doesn't move when I look at her directly, but I can feel her getting closer. She's still here. That's what the old woman at the trailhead told me. I thought she was crazy. She grabbed my arm and said, "She's still here in the deep forest, don't camp alone." I laughed it off. I'm not laughing now. The entry ended. Daniel flipped forward. The remaining pages were blank except for the final page, where Lauren had written in increasingly shaky handwriting, "If someone finds this, don't stay here after dark. Don't look for me. I made a mistake. I read something I shouldn't have. I tried to document something that didn't want to be seen." The fungal circle isn't a natural formation. It's a marker, it's a door. She comes through when you stand in the center. Below that, in writing so rushed it was barely legible, I can see her clearly now. She's standing right outside the tent. Her face is... The sentence ended in a long ink stroke as if the pen had been dragged across the page. Daniel set the journal down carefully, his hands steadier than they should be. Shock, probably. Or his mind refusing to process what he was reading. He backed out of the tent, stood, and assessed the situation with the systematic approach that had served him well for 14 years. Facts. Lauren Keating was missing. She'd experienced what she interpreted as paranormal phenomena. She'd written about a woman in white with long black hair, a description that matched dozens of horror movie tropes. She'd been alone in the wilderness, probably experiencing the psychological effects of isolation, creating patterns from random natural phenomena. She was scared, disoriented, and she'd run. That was the rational explanation. But Daniel's radio was still dead, and the light was getting dimmer, even though it was only 2:47 p.m. And behind him, from the direction of the mycorrhizal circle, he heard footsteps. Not heavy footsteps. Precise, light, mechanical in their rhythm. Getting closer. Daniel turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, perhaps 20 feet away. Long black hair, so dark it seemed to absorb light. White clothing that might have been a dress or a robe, the kind of indistinct garment that made it hard to focus on details. Her head was bowed, hair covering her face. "Ma'am?" Daniel's voice was steady. "I'm a park ranger. Are you injured? Do you need assistance?" She didn't respond. Didn't move. Just stood there, impossibly still, while the forest around her continued its subtle motion of dripping water and swaying branches. Daniel's training told him to approach, to assess, to render aid if needed. But something else, something older than training, something primal, told him not to move, not to approach, not to acknowledge what he was seeing. Because in all his years in these woods, he had never seen anyone stand that still. He took a step backward. The woman's head lifted slightly, not enough to see her face through the curtain of black hair, but enough that Daniel could see her neck, pale as paper, thin as a child's. Then she moved. Not walked. Moved. She covered the distance between them in an instant. No transition, no steps. She was at the edge of the clearing, and then she was 5 feet in front of him, and Daniel stumbled backward, his analytical mind screaming that this violated every physical law he'd ever known. Up close, he could see through the gaps in her hair, could see her face, or where her face should be. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were wrong, stretched. The proportions didn't match any human face he'd ever seen. The eyes were too large, too dark, and they didn't reflect his flashlight beam. They absorbed it like her hair, like she was made of something that light couldn't touch. Her mouth opened. Not to speak. Just opened, wider than should be anatomically possible, revealing darkness beyond. And from that darkness, Lauren's voice, "Daniel, help me." He ran. Every instinct, every bit of training, every rational thought fled in the face of what he'd seen. Daniel crashed through the undergrowth, branches clawing at his uniform, his breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the prey animal panic that had taken over his nervous system. Behind him, nothing. No footsteps. No pursuit. Just the terrible sense that if he looked back, she would be there. Right there. Always just outside his peripheral vision. His GPS was useless, spinning wildly. His compass needle swung in slow circles, but his legs knew the direction. Away. Just away. Daniel burst through a curtain of moss and found himself at the mycorrhizal circle. He stopped, gasping, his flashlight beam sweeping the clearing. The fungal threads glowed faintly in the dying light. That same geometric pattern he'd photographed. The pattern that Lauren had said was a marker. A door. And in the center of the circle, visible now that he was looking at the right angle, was a depression in the earth. Not natural. Too regular. Too deliberate. Roughly the size and shape of a human body. Fresh earth at its edges, as if it had been recently disturbed. Daniel's light caught something pale in the depression. He approached on wooden legs, his scientific training warring with his survival instinct. A hand, pale, small, reaching up from the earth. Lauren's hand he knew with terrible certainty. Her fingers were splayed, nails packed with dirt frozen in a grasping motion. But the hand wasn't attached to anything. It just emerged from the soil, impossibly, as if the rest of her body extended down into impossible depths. As he watched, the fingers twitched, then contracted, slowly, mechanically. They curled into a fist, and from somewhere, from the earth, from the air, from everywhere and nowhere, Lauren's voice whispered, "She's still here." Daniel backed away from the circle, his light swinging wildly. The forest around him had changed. The trees were in different positions, or maybe it was the same trees but arranged wrong, their angles and spacing creating patterns that hurt to look at. The mist had thickened into something almost solid, pressing against him from all sides. And in that mist, he saw them. Dozens of them. Figures in white with long black hair, standing between the trees. All perfectly still. All facing him. Some were close enough that he could almost see their features through their hair. Others were distant, barely visible, just suggestions of form in the fog. They were all opening their mouths. The voices came in a chorus, overlapping, some speaking English and some speaking in languages Daniel didn't recognize. Japanese, maybe, or something older. But the message was the same, repeated in 100 different voices. "She's still here, she's still here, she's still here." And among those voices he heard Lauren clear and distinct. "I tried to document something that didn't want to be seen." Daniel's radio crackled to life. Through the static, he heard dispatch. "Ranger Marsh, respond. Your position." He grabbed the radio with shaking hands, pressed the transmit button. "I'm at the mycorrhizal formation. Coordinates 47.8612 north, 123.9389 west. I need immediate extraction, I need..." The radio screamed. A sound like feedback but organic, like 1,000 voices shrieking in unison. Daniel dropped it, the device hitting the ground and continuing to emit that terrible sound. The figures in white were moving now, closing in with that same impossible motion. There and then closer, and then right there, no transition between. Daniel ran again, but this time he knew it was useless. The forest had become a maze, every direction leading back to the circle, every path returning him to the same spot. He could see his own footprints in the mud, see where he'd passed through the same clearing 3 times, 4 times, the prints overlapping in impossible patterns. He was trapped in the same loop that had caught Lauren. The rational part of his mind, the part that still believed in cause and effect, in natural laws and scientific explanation, tried desperately to make sense of what was happening. Hallucination, gas leak, some unknown compound from the fungal network affecting his nervous system, disorientation, panic. But the rest of him, the part that had existed long before evolution gave humans the ability to reason, knew the truth. He'd seen something that didn't want to be seen. He'd violated a boundary that shouldn't be crossed. And now the forest was claiming its price. Daniel found himself back at Lauren's tent. It was open now, though he'd zipped it closed. Inside, her field journals were scattered, pages torn out and arranged on the tent floor. They formed words in cut-up text, ransom note style. "Don't look for me, I'm still here, she's still here, we're all still here." His flashlight flickered. The beam caught something at the far edge of the clearing. Lauren. Not a figure in white. Actually, Lauren. He recognized her from the photo in the missing persons file. Wavy brown hair, athletic build, wearing the green rain jacket described in her vehicle information form. She was standing at the edge of the trees, looking directly at him. "Lauren?" His voice cracked. "Lauren Keating?" She didn't respond. Just stood there looking at him with an expression he couldn't read in the fading light. Daniel took a step toward her, then another. She remained still, watching him approach. "Are you injured? Can you walk? I'm here to help you." Lauren's mouth moved, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was the voice from his radio, hollow and distant. "She's still here." Behind her, another figure emerged from the trees. The woman in white, the one with the impossible face, the one whose mouth had opened too wide. But this time, Daniel could see her features clearly. She looked like Lauren. The same face, the same hair, though darker, longer, the same proportions, as if Lauren were looking into a terrible mirror that showed what she would become, or what had already begun. Lauren's, real Lauren's, living Lauren's, face began to change. Her skin paled, taking on that paper-white quality. Her hair darkened, lengthening before his eyes, strands falling forward to obscure her features. Her eyes went black and reflectionless. She took a step toward him. That mechanical, measured step. Daniel backed away, his hands raised. "This isn't real. This is some kind of... This is neurological, this is..." But the thing that had been Lauren was still approaching, and behind her the woman in white was now flanked by others. More figures. More victims, perhaps. All with that same transformation. All wearing white. All with faces that were wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. His back hit a tree. Trapped. The Lauren thing stopped 3 feet away. This close, Daniel could see that the transformation wasn't complete. Half her face was still human, still the graduate student who'd come here to study old-growth ecology. The other half was something else, something that matched the figures behind her. When she spoke, it was with 2 voices, her own and that hollow, distant one. She came here 50 years ago, a woman from Japan. She died in these woods. No one ever found her. She stayed. She's still here. And she's angry. So angry. She wants... The human side of Lauren's face contorted with effort, fighting against whatever was consuming her. She wants to be seen. She wants to be remembered. She wants... The hollow voice overwhelmed her own. She wants to share her place in the forest. Lauren's human eye met his, and in it Daniel saw desperation, terror, and something else. A warning. "Run," she whispered, the last bit of herself forcing out the word. "Don't come back, don't let anyone..." Then she screamed, a sound of pure anguish that became that same terrible feedback shriek from his radio. Her face completed its transformation, features stretching and distorting, until she was just another figure in white among dozens. And they all moved toward him at once. Daniel closed his eyes. His rational mind had finally broken, unable to process what it was witnessing. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he waited for the end. But nothing came. Slowly, he opened his eyes. He was standing on Ho River Trail, the main trail, marked and maintained. Behind him, he could see the trailhead parking lot through the trees. Ahead, the visitor center's roof was visible through the canopy. His Garmin GPS showed his correct position. His radio worked normally, dispatch calling his name with increasing urgency. Daniel stood there for a long moment, trying to reconcile what had happened with where he was. His clothing was soaked with sweat. His hands were shaking. His watch showed 5:47 p.m., 3 hours unaccounted for. He keyed his radio with trembling fingers. "Dispatch, this is Marsh. I'm back on the main trail, heading to base." "Copy that, Marsh. Did you find the missing hiker?" Daniel looked back the way he'd come. The forest was just forest. Moss-draped trees, sword ferns, the gentle sound of rain beginning to fall. Normal, natural, governed by principles he understood. "Negative," he said quietly. No sign of Lauren Keating. They found Lauren's tent 5 days later, following Daniel's coordinates. It was empty, her gear undisturbed. No sign of struggle, no evidence of wildlife interaction. The mycorrhizal formation was photographed and documented by a university team. An unusual but not unprecedented fairy ring formation, they concluded. Interesting, but explainable. Lauren Keating was officially classified as a missing person, presumed dead, cause unknown. Her faculty advisor established a memorial scholarship in her name. Her parents came to identify her belongings. They found her field journals, read her notes about old growth ecology and fungal networks. Science. Reason. The natural world operating on principles. Daniel Marsh stayed on as a ranger for another 3 months. He never returned to that part of the forest. In January, he requested a transfer to Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. When pressed for a reason, he said only that he wanted a change of scenery. He didn't mention the dreams, the ones where he walked through a forest that shifted and changed, where paths led in circles, where figures in white stood between the trees. He didn't mention waking up with dirt under his fingernails even though he hadn't left his house. He didn't mention the way his GPS sometimes showed coordinates that didn't match his location, as if it were picking up signals from somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't quite here. And he didn't mention the voice he sometimes heard in radio static during the deep night shifts when he was alone in the ranger station. Lauren's voice, distant and hollow. "Daniel. She's still here. We're all still here." On his last day at Olympic National Park, Daniel drove past the Hoh Rainforest trailhead. An elderly Asian woman was standing near the information kiosk, watching the parking area. She looked at him as he passed, and even from a distance, Daniel could see her expression. She knew. He kept driving, heading south, away from the forest that had broken his fundamental understanding of reality. But sometimes late at night, he wondered about that woman. Wondered how long she'd been standing watch. Wondered how many hikers she'd warned over the years. Wondered if anyone ever listened. And he wondered about the others, the figures he'd seen in the mist. How many hikers had disappeared into those woods over the decades? How many were still there, trapped in that loop, slowly transforming into something else? The Forest Service report listed Lauren Keating as the 7th unexplained disappearance in Olympic National Park in the past 50 years. All solo hikers. All in roughly the same area. All without a trace. Daniel knew the number was wrong. He'd seen dozens in the mist. Maybe hundreds. All still there. All waiting. All wearing white and standing so perfectly still among the trees. And somewhere in those woods, in a forest that existed parallel to but separate from the rational world Daniel had once believed in, Lauren Keating stood in a circle of fungal threads. Her face was mostly gone now, replaced by features that matched the woman who died here 50 years ago. The woman no one had ever found. The woman whose anger and loneliness had seeped into the forest itself, creating a pocket where the boundaries between life and death grew thin. When hikers passed nearby, Lauren sometimes found the strength to whisper a warning. "She's still here. Don't stay after dark. Don't camp alone." But most people didn't listen, and the circle kept growing.